साथियों, हमें विदेशी मुद्रा बचाने के जो भी रास्ते हम लोग अपना सकते हैं, हमें बचाना होगा। साल भर तक घर में हम सोने के गहने नहीं खरीदेंगे। वर्क फ्रॉम होम, ऑनलाइन कॉन्फ्रेंसिंग, वर्चुअल मीटिंग, इनको हमें फिर से प्राथमिकता देनी है। आज समय की मांग ऐसी है कि उन व्यवस्थाओं को हम फिर से शुरू करें।
In a public address in Hyderabad on May 10, 2026, Prime Minister Narendra Modi urged Indians to embrace austerity in the face of surging global energy prices triggered by conflict in West Asia. He called for reduced consumption of fuel and cooking oil, avoidance of gold purchases, prioritization of work-from-home arrangements to cut transportation needs, greater reliance on public electric transport like metros, and curtailment of foreign trips. Framed as patriotic duty to conserve foreign exchange, the speech echoes familiar appeals from past governments during oil shocks. Yet, coming from a regime that has presided over heightened import dependence and turned petroleum into a major revenue source, it raises uncomfortable questions about accountability, equity, and economic strategy. India has long been fuel deficient, relying heavily on imports. Successive administrations have appealed for conservation. What distinguishes the current situation is the scale of fiscal extraction from fuel and the policy choices that amplified vulnerabilities. Over the past 12 years, the government has levied substantial taxes on petroleum products, reportedly generating enormous revenues. Estimates suggest cumulative collections approaching or exceeding $1 trillion when factoring in excise duties, cesses, and related levies. High taxation helped stabilize budgets, but also made fuel a central cash cow, insulating government finances while passing volatility to consumers. Domestic crude production has stagnated or declined relative to demand. Import dependence has risen sharply, from around 77 to 80% in the mid-2010s to over 85 to 88% in recent years. Promises to reduce it to 67% went unmet. While diversification of sources, including discounted Russian crude, provided temporary relief and profits for some intermediaries, with reports of significant gains in a single year, geopolitical maneuvering has complicated this. Tensions involving Iran, alignment priorities, and disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz have undermined supply stability. The advantage of cheap oil was partially surrendered amid external pressures, leaving India more exposed. Modi's specific suggestions, work from home, carpooling, metro usage, reduced private vehicle travel, lower edible oil intake, and skipping non-essential gold buys and foreign trips target both household and commercial consumption. On paper, these promote efficiency and align with long-term goals like electric mobility and self-reliance in edible oils. Yet, the timing and framing are telling. They arrive after state election results, not as part of a proactive, transparent fiscal roadmap. The government has not detailed corresponding austerity on its end. Where will spending be cut? Which projects deferred? What about the flurry of project announcements and infrastructure pushes that continue unabated? India's economy is consumption-driven, with exports constituting only about 10 to 12% of GDP in recent years. Private consumption accounts for the bulk of demand. Urging broad cutbacks risks dampening growth precisely when resilience is needed. The informal sector and migrants, already strained by an LPG crisis that reportedly pushed some back to villages, have limited options. Work from home suits urban white-collar workers with digital access. Daily wage laborers, small vendors, and rural populations do not enjoy that luxury. Schemes like MGNREGA face implementation gaps and funding debates. Asking the poor to tighten belts without visible elite or governmental restraint invites cynicism. Gold holds particular cultural and economic significance. It is not merely conspicuous consumption, but a primary savings vehicle for millions, especially women in rural and low-income households lacking easy access to formal banking, equities, or insurance. Local prices may be influenced by global trends, but the recent appreciation has provided real returns to holders amid rupee pressures and inflation. Discouraging purchases for a year effectively asks people to forego an appreciating asset in favor of uncertain alternatives in a treacherous stock market or low-yield deposits. This appeal signals deeper worries: precariously positioned foreign exchange reserves and a rising current account deficit driven by energy and gold imports. In fiscal year 26, crude, gold, vegetable oils and fertilizers alone accounted for over $240 billion in imports.
Critics rightly note the absence of consultation. There has been little broad-based dialogue with opposition parties, economists, or civil society on the fiscal position. Social sector spending has historically borne the brunt of adjustments, raising fears that the poor will be hit hardest through reduced subsidies, welfare compression, or indirect effects of slower growth. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister continues high-profile events and project inaugurations, projecting business-as-usual optimism. This disconnect echoes the COVID period, when appeals for rent waivers and public cooperation met skepticism. Many migrant workers walked hundreds of kilometers home amid lockdown chaos. Trust in top-down calls remains fragile. Refineries are reportedly running normally, yet structural failures persist. Underinvestment in domestic exploration relative to needs. Slow progress on edible oil self-sufficiency despite repeated missions. And an energy policy still tethered to imports. Promoting solar pumps, EVs, and fertilizer efficiency is positive, but these are incremental. A consumption slowdown in a demand-deficient economy could exacerbate unemployment and rural distress. This moment demands more than individual patriotism. It requires governmental transparency on fiscal consolidation, slashing non-essential expenditure, rationalizing subsidies across the board, including for the well-off, accelerating domestic production, and building genuine strategic reserves. Foreign policy should prioritize energy security without ideological blinders. Long-term, India needs aggressive renewable scaling, efficiency standards, and urban planning that reduces transport demand organically rather than through crisis appeals. Prime Minister Modi's speech correctly identifies the import bill as a vulnerability. Conservation matters. But lecturing citizens on belt tightening while the state's own profligacy and policy missteps contributed to the bind undermines the message. In a democracy, shared sacrifice requires shared accountability. Without spelling out where the government will cut its own cloth, this risks being perceived as burden shifting onto ordinary Indians, especially the vulnerable who cannot WFH, carpool in non-existent metros, or hedge savings in global markets. True resilience comes not from sporadic appeals, but from consistent, equitable policy that strengthens production, cushions the poor, and reduces structural dependence. India deserves that conversation now, not another round of patriotic restraint.
देश दुनिया की रखे खबर
हर रोज हर शाम
कानो कान
सुनते रहें द लेंस पॉडकास्ट।
रहे अपडेट लेंस के साथ।